Welcome to Cineights, where you get to know the best movies and series. Today's video is about the 10 best movies based on a true story. I hope you enjoy this video. Be sure to watch until the end because I am sure you will like it. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Selma 2014. On March 7, 1965, as voting rights demonstrators attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Ala. During a march to the state capitol in Montgomery, they were met by heavily armed police. The day would, known as Bloody Sunday, after 17 marchers were hospitalized and 50 treated for lesser injuries, would become a key moment in the fight against racist voter suppression in the U.S., as televised images of the attacks on the marchers stunned the country. Protesters did not give up. These events are the backdrop for the Ava DuVernay-directed film Selma, which, with its recreation of the months leading up to the marches, illustrates the complexities of social justice movements and their leaders. For Joseph P. Reedy, Emeritus Professor of History at Howard University, the film's strength lies in both depicting the debates between leaders like King and John Lewis, and the stories of unsung local heroes, immortalized in contemporary newsreels, which fueled public outrage and forced President Lyndon B. Johnson to condemn the violence inflicted on the marchers. The French Connection, 1971. The complex drug trafficking scheme known as the French Connection was cooked up by Corsican gangsters in the 1930s. Poppy seeds were shipped from Turkey and Lebanon to Marseille, a major French seaport, where they were processed into heroin, before being shipped out to U.S. by the 1960s. Up to 44 tons were being moved in the U.S. yearly, prompting then-President Richard Nixon to dramatically crack down on drugs, and providing plenty of fodder for Robin Moore's 1969 nonfiction book about some of the NYPD's busts during the time, The French Connection. 2 years later, director William Friedkin's Oscar-winning film of the same name debuted, with a slightly fictionalized twist on the thrilling real-life drug seizures. Friedkin took some liberties with the film, including its iconic car chase. He was committed to keeping the story fairly realistic. With this, he brought on Eddie Egan and Sonny Grosso, the NYPD detectives who provided the inspiration for the film's protagonists, Detective Popeye Doyle and his partner buddy, Cloudy Russo. Schindler's List, 1993. Filmmaker Steven Spielberg wanted the cast of his adaptation of Thomas Keneally's 1982 historical novel to keep something in mind. "We're not making a film, we're making a document," as he put it. Up until that point, there had been documentaries and European films about the Holocaust, but not a modern Hollywood blockbuster. Liam Neeson stars as the real businessman Oskar Schindler, credited with saving more than 1,000 Jewish people by putting them to work in his munitions factory in Brunlitz, in what's now the Czech Republic. In reality, there was more than one list, written not by Schindler, but by a Plaszow camp orderly named Marcel Goldberg, that had the names of those cleared to be transported to Schindler's factory. That departure from fact did not mar the movie's impact. The film was hailed not only by critics, it won the Academy Award for Best Picture, but also by Holocaust survivors, who found its depiction of what they went through and the brutality of the Nazi regime so realistic that it inspired many to share their own memories, thus enabling historians to preserve their stories for future generations. The Sound of Music, 1965. Julie Andrews running through the Austrian hills as Maria in the 1965 film The Sound of Music is perhaps one of the most well-known opening scenes in cinema history. Based on the memoir of the real Maria, the movie tells the story of a free-spirited nun sent to become a governess for 7 musical children, just before the start of World War II. As in the film, Maria married Georg von Trapp and the family toured Europe in 1937 as the Von Trapp Family Choir. The following year, they fled Austria, which had been annexed by the Nazis, and made their way to New York, where they held their first American concert in December 1938. Sound of Music debuted on Broadway in 1959 and the hit film was released 6 years later, largely remaining faithful to the true story. Though the real Georg was said not to be as cold-hearted as his film double, and Maria was said to sometimes have a bit of a temper, contrary to Julie Andrews' ever-cheery depiction. 12 Years a Slave, 2013. Black British director Steve McQueen's triple Academy Award-winning 12 Years a Slave, starring Chiwetel Ejiofor and Lupita Nyong'o, is a raw, horrifying and essential document, declared Times film critic. Ejiofor stars as Solomon Northup, a free African-American man who was living in Saratoga Springs, NY, when he was lured away and kidnapped in 1841 and sold into slavery in Louisiana. The film was based on Northup's own 1853 memoir 12 Years a Slave, which documented his treatment on the plantation and his eventual freedom and reunion with his family, as well as on input from historians and researchers. 12 Years a Slave meets the high bar for historical accuracy as well as artistic excellence, says Manisha Sinha, Draper Chair in American History at the University of Connecticut, who recommends the film to her students as a source for their work. For the most part extremely faithful to the original narrative of Solomon Northup, which I had taught in my class for years before the movie came out, I think he would approve. Goodfellas, 1990. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster, declares Ray Liotta's Henry Hill, protagonist of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, the 1990 classic crime film charting the rise and fall of a mafioso and his network in Italian-American Brooklyn. Viewers of the film, however, are left with plenty of reasons why life in the mob might not be quite so desirable. Billed as the fastest, sharpest 2.5-hour ride in recent film history, by Times film critic on its release, Goodfellas was based on the 1985 Wise Guy. Life in a Mafia Family by crime reporter Nicholas Pileggi, who also co-wrote the screenplay for the film. Pileggi's book detailed the life of the real Henry Hill and his associates Thomas DeSimone and James, Jimmy, Burke. Characters inspired those played by Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro in the movie, which featured the real 1978 Lufthansa heist at JFK Airport, thought to have been planned by Burke. Spotlight 2015, starring Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams and Michael Keaton as members of a real team of investigative journalists at the Boston Globe. Spotlight shows the efforts of reporters to uncover the history of systematic sexual abuse within the Archdiocese of Boston. The film is largely faithful to true events and based on real people. In January 2002, the Boston Globe Spotlight Investigations team published their first story in a series of articles exposing the cover-up of the abuse by Roman Catholic priests. Marty Baron, the current editor of The Washington Post, was the editor of the Globe at the time the film takes place and is portrayed by Leah Schreiber in the film. What is especially striking about the film is how well the director and writers effectively conveyed the real-life story of this group of courageous journalists, while carefully and delicately unveiling the personal lives of the victims of abuse, says Keisha N. Blaine, associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid 1969. Paul Newman and Robert Redford stole hearts and set a new standard for the buddy film when they portrayed notorious real-life outlaws Robert, Butch Cassidy, Leroy Parker and Harry, the Sundance Kid, Longabaugh in 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. While the film begins with the disclaimer that, most of which follows is true, in reality, the film takes plenty of creative liberties in the service of creating a rollicking, if not quite historically accurate, Western. Even the central relationship was really more of a casual working partnership than the best friendship portrayed in the film, according to Cassidy's sister Lula Parker Bedenson, and the film's famous ending is still the subject of historical debate. Did the two men die in Bolivia or, as Cassidy's sister nephew contend, did Cassidy escape? Those questions, however, don't detract from the movie's impact, or that of the character of Etta Place, played by Catherine Ross, says Stephanie Kuntz, Emeritus Faculty of History and Family Studies at the Evergreen State College. All the President's Men 1976. A younger generation might know Bob Woodward for his exhaustive chronicles of the Trump administration in his books Fear, Trump in the White House and Rage. But nearly half a century earlier, he was uncovering the secrets of another president, Richard Nixon. In 1972, he and Washington Post colleague Carl Bernstein began to investigate a break-in at the Democratic National Convention. After exhaustive research, they found that the break-in was part of a massive campaign of political espionage and sabotage on behalf of Nixon and against his opponents. The Watergate scandal soon brought about the downfall of Nixon's presidency. Journalists and editor Ben Bradley, says Barbara A. Perry, Gerald L. Beliles professor in presidential studies, actor at the University of Virginia's Miller Center, are genuine American heroes. Just 4 years after the break-in, Alan J. Pakula's film was released, with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman playing Woodward and Bernstein, respectively, in their dogged hunt for the truth. Dog Day Afternoon 1975. Al Pacino has played many criminal masterminds over the course of his career, but John Wojtowicz isn't one of them. On a scorching 1972 summer day, the Vietnam War veteran made a clumsy attempt to rob a Brooklyn bank, only to be penned in with hostages for a 14-hour standoff. Sidney Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon depicts the agonizing time spent inside the bank, during which Wojtowicz agonized over his actions and unexpectedly bonded with some of his captives. Among our pool of 10 historians and 10-time staffers, everyone who had seen the film ranked it either great or fantastic, and, points out historian Annette Gordon-Reed, Pacino's explosive performance also created a bit of history, in the form of the 1970s catchphrase, Attica, Attica. After the film's release, Wojtowicz complained in a letter written from prison that the film was only 30% true, although he also called Pacino's depiction of himself flawless.